Twilight, Preface in Chapter 1 for Sleep, First Sight. Welcome, and please find a comfortable place to rest. Allow your body to become heavy and still. Tonight, we begin a new story, a journey from the bright, piercing sun to a place of soft, eternal twilight. Let your breath deepen and slow as we begin. In a quiet moment, a peaceful thought arises. Imagine standing at the very edge of your life as you know it, not in a place of endings, but on the threshold of a great unfolding dream. It's a dream so much grander than anything you've ever dared to expect. There is no fear here, only a deep sense of acceptance. A presence stands before you, not as a threat, but as an elegant, beautiful hunter, and you feel only a gentle inevitability. This is a good way to begin a new story, to step into the unknown for a reason so profound it brings a quiet nobility to your heart. You would not change a thing. Before we settle into the quiet truth of this story, where are you listening from tonight? Whether you're in a cozy room or just seeking a moment of peace, let me know in the comments below. And if this journey brings you a sliver of calm, a quick like and subscribe would be deeply appreciated. It's comforting to know who else is sharing this slow, misty rhythm with us. My mother drove me to the airport. The windows of the car were rolled all the way down, and the air was a gentle, sun-kissed 75 degrees. The sky above us was an impossibly perfect, cloudless blue, a flawless canvas of light. I wore my favorite sleeveless shirt, a soft eyelet lace fabric in pure white, a final fond farewell to this desert heat. Tucked into my carry-on bag was a heavy parka, a small tangible promise of a world entirely different from this one. I was traveling to the Olympic Peninsula in northwest Washington, to a small town called Forks. This town exists in a place of constant soft shadow, under a near-constant cover of clouds. It's a quiet place where the rain is a constant companion, falling more gently and more often than anywhere else in the United States. It was from this town, from its deep evergreen shade, that my mother had escaped with me when I was just a baby. But now it was to this town that I was returning, an exile I was learning to accept with a calm heart. "Bella," my mom said to me, her voice a warm and familiar whisper, one last time before I walked away. "You don't have to do this." She looked so much like me, with wide, kind, childlike eyes, but with a network of tiny laugh lines around them, a map of her own happiness. A small flicker of panic passed through me, thinking of my loving, wonderfully chaotic mother. How could I leave her to fend for herself? But she had Phil now, and a new kind of calm had come into her life. The bills would be paid, the refrigerator would hold food, and someone would be there to help her when she got lost in her own mind. "I want to go," I lied, letting the words fall easily from my lips. I had said it so many times now that it had become a soft, gentle truth in my mind. "Tell Charlie I said hi. But a mistkiste fi arberno." "I will. I'll see you soon," she insisted, her eyes holding a deep promise. "You can come home whenever you want." I could feel the sacrifice in her words, the generous giving of her own freedom for mine. "Don't worry about me," I urged, my own voice soft. "It'll be great. I love you, Mom." She hugged me tightly for a minute, the warmth of her body a final comfort, and then I stepped away and walked toward the gate. The flight from Phoenix to Seattle is 4 hours, a long, quiet journey above the clouds. After that, a smaller plane takes you for another hour to a place called Port Angeles. Then there is the final hour's drive back to Forks. The hours on the planes passed by in a peaceful blur, but the final car ride with my father, Charlie, felt like the most significant part of the journey. Charlie and I are both quiet people. Neither of us is what anyone would call verbose. I knew he was happy to have me here, but our comfort was in silence. As my plane landed in Port Angeles, I saw the rain for the first time. It was a soft, unavoidable presence, not a storm. I'd already said my farewells to the bright desert sun, and I was ready for this gentle veil. Charlie was waiting for me with his police cruiser, a familiar sight. He gave me an awkward one-armed hug when I stumbled off the plane, a sweet and clumsy gesture. "It's good to see you, Bells," he said, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You haven't changed much. How's Renee?" "Mom's fine. It's good to see you too, Dad." I always called him Dad to his face, though Charlie was the name I used in my thoughts. My belongings were few, mostly winter clothes that my mom and I had pooled our money to buy. The few bags I had fit easily into the trunk of the cruiser. As we were about to drive off, he made an announcement. "I found a good car for you. Really cheap," he said, a note of hopeful excitement in his voice. "What kind of car?" I asked, a little suspicious. "Well, it's a truck actually, a Chevy," he said, letting the words hang in the air. He explained he got it from an old friend, Billy Black, who was now in a wheelchair and couldn't drive. When I pressed him for the year, a slight blush came to his cheeks. "He bought it in 1984, I think," he said, a little sheepishly. "Did he buy it new?" "Well, no. I think it was new in the early 60s or late 50s at the earliest," he admitted, his voice a little softer. "Dad, I don't really know anything about cars. I wouldn't be able to fix it if anything went wrong, and I couldn't afford a mechanic." "Bella, the thing runs great," he insisted. "They don't build them like that anymore." I thought to myself, the thing? It was a good nickname. "How cheap is cheap?" I asked, a practical question. "Well, honey, I kind of already bought it for you, as a homecoming gift." He gave me a sideways glance, his expression full of hope. "And why the pastverbrechen for menen breed, and salvo wa x mens, when a tomstrans batlig bakt en food, when why the tonight is, was slide for sota side. Free. It was a wonderful word." "What? You didn't need to do that, Dad. I was going to buy myself a car." "I don't mind. I want you to be happy here." He said this looking straight ahead, his voice quiet. He wasn't comfortable with emotions, and I knew that feeling all too well. "That's really nice, Dad. Thanks. I really appreciate it." I didn't need to mention that happiness in Forks was a distant dream. There was no need for him to share my small melancholy. We fell into a comfortable silence, staring out the windows. The landscape was undeniably beautiful. Everything was a deep, vibrant green. The trunks of the trees were covered with soft, velvety moss, their branches hanging low with a thick canopy of it. The ground was a lush carpet of ferns. Even the air that filtered down through the leaves seemed to be tinted a deep, serene green. It was a beautiful, alien world, a place of constant, gentle life. Eventually, we arrived at Charlie's small two-bedroom house, the same one he had bought with my mother in the early fleeting days of their marriage. Parked on the street in front of the house was my new-to-me truck. It was a faded, soft red with a solid, rounded shape and a high, bulbous cab. To my complete surprise, I found myself loving it. It looked strong and dependable, the kind of vehicle that would never get damaged. I could easily see myself in it. "Wow, Dad, I love it." "Thanks," I said, the words genuine. The simple fact that I wouldn't have to walk 2 miles in the rain or ride in the Chief's cruiser was a huge relief. "I'm glad you like it," Charlie said, his voice a little gruff from the embarrassment of my thing. It took only one trip to carry all my things upstairs. My room was the west-facing bedroom, looking out over the front yard. The room felt immediately familiar, it had been mine since the day I was born. The wooden floor, the soft blue walls, the peaked ceiling, the yellowed lace curtains, all of it felt like a part of my own history. The only changes were a bed instead of a crib, and a desk with a second-hand computer that my mother had insisted on so we could stay in touch. In the corner sat the old rocking chair from my baby days, a gentle monument to a time I didn't remember. One of the best things about Charlie is that he doesn't hover. He left me alone to unpack and get settled, a gentle silence I appreciated deeply. It was a relief to be by myself, to not have to put on a smile. I could stare dejectedly out the window at the sheeting rain and let a few quiet tears escape, a small release of emotion. I wasn't ready for a full crying jag yet. I was saving that for bedtime. Forks High School had a total of only 357 students, a stark contrast to the 700 people in my junior class back home. I knew I would be the new girl from the big city, a curiosity, perhaps even a freak, but I was not a girl who fit in anywhere. I was pale-skinned, without the excuse of red hair or blue eyes, and soft in my movements, not athletic. When I finished putting my clothes away, I went to the small communal bathroom at the top of the stairs. I looked at my face in the mirror, brushing through my tangled hair. My skin already looked a little less vibrant, a little more sallow. It depended so much on light and color. Facing my reflection, I was forced to admit that I didn't relate well to people in general. Even my mother and I, who were closer than anyone, were never truly on the same page. Maybe there was a glitch in my brain, a quiet misconnection. But whatever the cause, the effect was that tomorrow would be a long, quiet day. I didn't sleep well that night. The whooshing of the rain and wind across the roof was a constant, loud presence, a sound I was not yet used to. I pulled the faded old quilt over my head and later added the pillow, trying to muffle the sound. I couldn't fall asleep until after midnight, when the wind finally settled and the rain became a quieter, steady drizzle, a gentle, hypnotic tapping against the window pane. In the morning, the world outside was a thick, gray fog. I could feel a soft sense of claustrophobia, a peaceful enclosure. Here, you could never see the sky, and it felt like a kind of soft cage. Breakfast with Charlie was a quiet, almost silent affair. He wished me good luck at school, and I thanked him. After he left, I sat at the old square oak table, sipping my coffee, and looked at the small kitchen, the dark paneled walls, the bright yellow cabinets my mother had painted so long ago, and the pictures on the fireplace mantel, all told a story of a life that had moved on, but not for Charlie. It made me feel a little uncomfortable. I didn't want to be too early for school, but I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I put on my jacket, a thick, heavy shell that felt like a biohazard suit, and headed out into the morning mist. The rain was just a drizzle, not enough to soak me right away. The sloshing sound of my new waterproof boots felt unnatural on the wet pavement, and I missed the normal crunch of gravel. I got into the truck. It was warm and dry inside. Either Billy or Charlie had cleaned it, but the old tan seats still held a faint, lingering scent of tobacco, gasoline, and peppermint. To my relief, the engine started right away, but it roared to life loudly, a deep, thunderous sound. Well, an old truck was bound to have a flaw. The antique radio worked, a small and unexpected bonus. Finding the school wasn't difficult. It was just off the highway, a collection of matching buildings made of maroon-colored bricks, so surrounded by trees and shrubs that it was hard to see its full size. It felt less like an institution and more like a collection of quiet houses. I parked in front of the first building, which was marked front office. I took a deep breath before opening the door, stepping out of the toasty cab, and into the misty air. Inside, the office was brightly lit and wonderfully warm. The room was small and filled with a long counter cluttered with wire baskets and brightly colored flyers. A large red-haired woman with glasses sat behind a desk, wearing a purple t-shirt. She looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Dave, I'm Bella Swan," I told her, and saw the immediate look of recognition in her eyes. I was the new girl, the chief's daughter, a topic of quiet gossip. "Of course," she said, and she found my schedule and a map of the school. She went through my classes with me, highlighting the best route to each one, and wished me luck. I smiled back as convincingly as I could. When I went back out to my truck, other students were beginning to arrive. I drove around the school, following the line of cars. I was glad to see that most of them were older, like my truck. At home, it was common to see a new Mercedes or Porsche in the student lot. Here, the nicest car was a shiny Volvo, and it stood out. I cut the engine as soon as I was in a spot, hoping the loud rumble wouldn't draw too much attention. I looked at the map in the truck, memorizing the layout. I then took a huge, slow breath, slung my bag over my shoulder, and stepped out into the misty rain. I kept my face pulled back into my hood as I walked to the sidewalk, a quiet observer in the crowd of teenagers. My plain black jacket didn't stand out, which was a relief. Inside Building 3, a large black number painted on a white square, a long row of hooks held coats. I copied the two girls in front of me, taking off my jacket and hanging it up. The classroom was small, and the teacher, a tall, balding man named Mr. Small, looked at me with some curiosity, but sent me to an empty desk in the back. I kept my eyes on the reading list he gave me, a list of authors like Bronte and Shakespeare, all of whom I had already read. It was a small, comforting detail. When the bell rang with a buzzing sound, a boy with dark hair and skin problems named Eric leaned across the aisle to talk to me. "You're Bella Swan, aren't you?" he asked. "Bella?" I corrected him. "Where's your next class?" he asked. I checked my bag. "Government with Jefferson in Building 6. "I'm headed toward Building 4. I could show you the way," he offered, sounding a little overly helpful. "Thanks," I said with a small smile. We got our jackets and headed back out into the rain, which had picked up. As we walked, a few people behind us seemed to be walking a little too close, as if they were trying to listen in. I tried not to become paranoid. "So, this is a lot different than Phoenix, huh?" he asked. "Will it vary? It doesn't rain much there, does it?" 3 or 4 times a year. "Wow. What must that be like?" he wondered. "Sunny," I told him, a simple, quiet truth. He walked me right to the door of my next class. "Well, good luck," he said, his voice hopeful. I smiled vaguely and went inside. The rest of the morning passed in about the same fashion. I started to recognize a few faces, and a few brave students asked me questions about how I was liking Forks. I tried to be diplomatic, and I found myself telling a lot of small, quiet lies. At least I never needed the map. After your second class, a girl walked with you to the cafeteria for lunch. She was a tiny girl with a wild cloud of dark, curly hair. Though her name had slipped your mind, you sat beside her and listened as she chattered softly about teachers and classes, her voice a gentle, rhythmic hum. You simply smiled and nodded, not needing to keep up, just letting her words wash over you like soft rain. You sat with her and several of her friends at the end of a long, full table. As you listened to their low conversations, your eyes drifted across the room. That's when you first saw them. They were sitting in a quiet corner of the cafeteria, away from everyone else. There were 5 of them. They weren't talking, and their food lay untouched on their trays. They didn't seem to notice anyone, not even you, and this allowed you to observe them with a sense of peace. They didn't look alike, and yet they seemed to be a part of the same beautiful tableau. There were 3 boys. One was broad and strong, with dark curly hair. Another was tall and lean, with honey blonde hair. The last was lanky and had untidy bronze-colored hair. He looked younger than the others. The girls were opposites, a tall, graceful figure with golden flowing hair and a tiny pixie-like girl with short black hair that pointed in every direction. They all had the most luminous skin, a beautiful ethereal paleness that seemed to glow in the light of the cafeteria. It was a skin tone that was paler than even your own, the color of porcelain. They all had very dark eyes, with a kind of gentle, shadowy depth beneath them, as if they were all connected by a shared, quiet dream. All of their features were perfectly straight, perfect and beautifully angular, like sculptures carved by an old master. They were so different, and yet so much alike. And yet, it was none of these things that held your attention. It was their faces. Each one was so profoundly, so divinely beautiful, like something you would only ever see in a painting of an angel. It was impossible to decide which of them was the most lovely. As you watched, the small pixie-like girl rose from her seat. With a quiet, fluid motion, she walked away with her tray, her movements like those of a dancer on a stage. She moved faster than seemed possible, gliding through the back door and disappearing from sight. Your eyes returned to the others, who sat perfectly still and unchanging. "Who are they?" you asked the girl beside you, whose name you were now trying to recall. She glanced up, and as she did, the boy with the bronze-colored hair looked up for just a fraction of a second. His dark eyes flickered, making a brief, almost accidental connection with yours, and then he looked away. Your neighbor gave a little giggle and said quietly, "That's Edward and Emmett Cullen, and Rosalie and Jasper Hale. The one who left was Alice Cullen. They all lived together with Dr. Cullen and his wife. The names sounded old-fashioned, but they had a peaceful, rhythmic quality to them." You stole a quiet glance at the beautiful boy. He was now looking down at his tray, picking a bagel to pieces with long, pale fingers. His lips were moving very quickly, almost imperceptibly, as if he were having a private conversation. Jessica, your new friend, said they were all together. Emmett and Rosalie, and Jasper and Alice. And they lived together. She explained that they were all adopted by Dr. and Mrs. Cullen, a kind gesture from a very young couple. You felt a small surge of pity and relief. Pity, because despite their beauty, they were outsiders, just like you, and relief, because you weren't the most interesting newcomer anymore. As you continued to watch them, the boy named Edward looked up again. This time, his gaze was a little more curious, and you quickly looked away, feeling a small, quiet flutter of embarrassment. He was still staring at you when you peeked back, but his expression was not one of curiosity. It was one of deep frustration. "Which one is the boy with the reddish-brown hair?" you asked. "That's Edward," Jessica said with a sigh. "He's gorgeous, but he doesn't date. Apparently none of the girls here are good-looking enough for him." You bit your lip to hide a smile, and from the corner of your eye, you thought you saw his cheek lift, as if he were smiling too. A few minutes later, the 4 of them rose from the table. Their movements were graceful and smooth, a mesmerizing sight to watch. They moved together as one, and Edward didn't look at you again. You sat at the table a little longer, but soon it was time for your next class. A girl named Angela, who you now remembered, had biology with you. She was shy too, and you walked together in a comfortable silence. When you entered the classroom, you found that all the lab tables were filled, but one, in the center aisle, you saw Edward Cullen, his bronze hair tousled, sitting beside that single open seat. As you walked down the aisle to get your slip signed, you watched him quietly. As you passed his table, he suddenly went rigid in his seat. He turned and looked directly at you, his eyes a deep coal black, with an intense expression on his face. It was not anger, but a profound, almost painful concentration. You looked away quickly, feeling a jolt of quiet wonder, and you stumbled a little, catching yourself on the edge of a table. The teacher, Mr. Banner, signed your slip and handed you a book. Of course, he had no choice but to send you to the one open seat, right next to Edward. As you walked to your seat, you didn't look at him, but you could see from the corner of your eye that he was leaning away from you, sitting on the very edge of his chair, as if he were trying to put as much distance between you as possible. You thought you could almost feel a sense of powerful, unseen tension. You let your hair fall over your right shoulder, creating a soft, dark curtain between you, and you tried to pay attention to the teacher's lecture on cellular anatomy, but you couldn't stop yourself from quietly peeking at the boy next to you. He never relaxed his stiff position, his hand on his left leg clenched into a fist. He sat so still, it seemed like he wasn't even breathing. You noticed his forearm was surprisingly hard and muscular, a strong contrast to his pale skin. The class seemed to last forever. You were quietly observing him, waiting for his tight fist to loosen, but it never did. He continued to sit, perfectly still, a silent mystery. One last time, you peeked up at him and regretted it. His black eyes were fixed on you with a look of deep, profound revulsion. As you flinched away, shrinking against your chair, a phrase ran through your mind: if looks could kill. At that moment, the bell rang loudly, making you jump. Edward Cullen was out of his seat with a smooth, fluid motion. He rose taller than you had realized and was out the door before anyone else had even moved. You sat frozen for a moment, simply staring after him, filled with a quiet confusion. You began to gather your things slowly, trying to block out the feelings that were building inside you. Then, a kind, friendly voice spoke. "Aren't you Bella Swan?" a cute, baby-faced boy with pale blonde hair asked. "Bella," you corrected him with a small, grateful smile. "I'm Mike." "Hi, Mike." He walked with you to your next class, talking easily, supplying most of the conversation. He was friendly and kind, but it wasn't enough to quiet the strange feelings that had stirred inside you. He mentioned Edward's unusual behavior, which confirmed that you were not imagining things. When you got to the gym, he left you with a friendly smile, but the mystery of what had just happened still lingered. The final bell rang at last, and you walked slowly to the office to return your paperwork. The rain had stopped, but a cold, strong wind was blowing. You wrapped your arms around yourself for warmth. When you walked into the office, you almost turned right back around. Edward Cullen was standing at the desk in front of you. He was arguing with the receptionist in a low, attractive voice. He wanted to change his biology class, to move to a different hour, any other hour. You couldn't believe it was about you. It had to be something else, something that happened before you entered the room. But just then, the door opened again, and a cold gust of wind swirled your hair around your face. Edward's back stiffened, and he turned slowly to look at you. His handsome face was a beautiful mask of fury, his eyes a piercing black. For just an instant, a thrill of genuine fear made the hair on your arms stand up. It was a chilling look, a moment of deep, profound mystery. He turned back to the receptionist. "Never mind then," he said in a voice as soft as velvet. "I can see that it's impossible. Thank you so much for your help." and then he was gone, disappearing out the door without another look. You walked meekly to the desk, your face no longer red, but pale and quiet. The receptionist asked, "How did your first day go, dear?" "Fine," you lied, your voice weak. She didn't look convinced. When you finally got to your truck, it was almost the last car in the lot. It felt like a true haven, the closest thing to a home you had found in this damp green hole. You sat for a while, just staring blankly out the windshield, letting the quiet solitude wash over you. When you finally turned the key, the engine roared to life, a familiar and reassuring sound, and you headed back to Charlie's house, a small sense of peace beginning to settle in your heart.